You don't remember when it started. Not one breakup. Not one bad day. Just a heaviness that crept in quietly, the way night falls, so slowly you don't notice until the room is dark. At first, it was small things. A faint weight in your chest. A tiredness that sleep couldn't cure. The things that once gave you joy began to feel distant, muted, like music played from another room. People kept talking, you kept nodding, but inside, something was disappearing. You called it depression. Everyone does. But what if that word is misleading you? What if this ache inside of you is not the end, but the beginning? Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists in history, faced this exact darkness. To the world, it looked like madness, a breakdown, even the loss of his mind. But Jung didn't call it that. He called it a descent into the self. For 6 long years, he surrendered to visions, symbols, and dreams so overwhelming that he feared he might never return. And out of that descent came the Red Book, a private record of his inner journey. A book so strange, so raw, and so dangerous that he refused to publish it while he was alive. Inside, he recorded conversations with gods and shadows, encounters with his deepest fears and forgotten desires. But more than that, he recorded a message not just for himself, but for anyone who has felt lost, numb, or broken. You are not depressed. You are awakening. This video is about that message. It's about the possibility that your pain is not random, not meaningless, not proof of your weakness. It's about seeing your depression as a signal, a summons from your own unconscious, calling you to shed the mask of who you thought you were. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why Jung believed that descent into darkness is not a curse, but an initiation. You'll see how his confrontation with chaos can help you face your own shadow and uncover a self you've never truly met. Carl Jung's descent began not with clarity, but with collapse. At the height of his career, when he was respected, published, and admired, Jung began to unravel inside. To his colleagues, it looked like he was losing his mind. To Jung himself, it felt like he was being torn open by something greater than reason. He called it his confrontation with the unconscious. For 6 years, Jung entered a private world of visions and inner voices. He journaled, he painted, he listened to dreams that shook him to his core. At times he wondered if he would ever find his way back. But here's what makes this descent so important for us today. Jung didn't run from the darkness. He entered it deliberately. He let go of the idea that depression, despair, or madness were just malfunctions to be fixed. Instead, he began to see them as messages from the deepest layers of the psyche, the parts of ourselves we spend our whole lives ignoring. Think about that. When we feel numb, when life feels meaningless, when motivation collapses, we assume something is wrong. We call it a breakdown, a disorder, a failure. But Jung realized it can also be a summons, a call from the soul itself, refusing to keep playing along with a life that no longer feels real. And that's why Jung's work is so dangerous, even today. Because if your suffering isn't just chemical, if it isn't just bad luck, if it's actually your inner self calling you inward, then everything changes. You're not broken. You're being initiated. Imagine this. Your soul has been watching you build a life of roles and expectations, the career you chose because it was safe, the relationships you stayed in because you feared loneliness, the masks you wore to be liked. One day, your soul says, enough, and it pulls back. You feel it as emptiness, detachment, exhaustion. But beneath those symptoms is something deeper, the birth of a truer self. That's what Jung discovered in his Red Book. Depression wasn't always pathology. Sometimes it was preparation. Preparation for a journey through chaos, through confusion, through the shadow. Not to escape it, but to be transformed by it. This is the descent. Not a fall into nothingness, but a fall into truth. The truth of who you are beneath the masks. The truth of what you've repressed, denied, and abandoned in order to survive. And here's the paradox. What looks like falling apart is often the first step in waking up. What looks like madness may actually be the path to sanity. What looks like depression may actually be the soul's rebellion against a false life. Jung wrote in the Red Book, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But he chose the opposite. He faced it, and in doing so, he gave us a map. The question now is, will you? Upstairs, every room is filled with people. Family, friends, co-workers, strangers. You play your roles there. You smile, nod, laugh at jokes. You keep the peace, you perform, you belong. The noise never stops. But then one day, you step quietly down the stairs, into the basement. It's dim. The air is heavier. The walls are bare. You are alone. And for the first time in years, there's silence. This is the moment most people panic. They rush back upstairs, desperate for the noise, the comfort, the distraction. Because in the silence, the shadows start to move. The loneliness becomes sharp. And then, you hear something strange, a voice. Not from outside, but from somewhere deep within. And it says, "I've been waiting for you." That voice is your real self. The one you abandoned to survive. The one who never wanted to be perfect, only whole. Carl Jung described his descent into the unconscious exactly like this. He chose not to run back upstairs. He stayed in the basement of his psyche. And what he found there wasn't peace, not at first. He found chaos. He found fear. He found grotesque figures, visions of gods, demons, serpents. He found parts of himself he had buried so deeply, he didn't recognize them at all. But here's the secret Jung uncovered. Those shadows were not enemies. They were fragments of his own soul, pieces of his humanity that had been rejected, silenced, and forgotten. This is what depression often feels like, sitting in that basement, alone, unsure if the silence will crush you. But if you can resist the urge to run, if you can sit with it long enough, you begin to hear the whispers. You begin to realize that what feels like emptiness is actually the presence of something hidden, waiting to be reclaimed. And this is where the transformation begins. Not in escaping the darkness, but in facing it. Not in running back to the noise of performance, but in letting the silence speak. Jung didn't discover answers overnight. In fact, what he found at first was confusion, fear, and even madness. But he kept listening, and slowly, a deeper truth began to emerge. That truth was simple, but terrifying. Who you think you are is only a mask. And when the mask begins to rot, when your soul refuses to wear it any longer, you are forced into the basement. Not to be destroyed, but to be reborn. So the next time you feel yourself withdrawing, sinking into that silent place, remember this. You're not being abandoned by life. You're being invited into your own basement. And down there, in the shadows, your real self is still waiting. When Jung entered the basement of his mind, he didn't just find silence and shadows. He found a language older than words, a language made of images, symbols, and archetypes. This is what the Red Book really is, not a diary, but a record of conversations with the unconscious. Jung painted his visions. He wrote dialogues with figures who seemed alive, even though they were born from his own psyche. At times he doubted himself. Was he going insane? But the more he listened, the more he realized these figures carried truths he had never dared to face. One of them was Philemon, a wise old man with kingfisher wings. Philemon became Jung's inner teacher, a prophetic guide who spoke in riddles but revealed insights beyond Jung's own intellect. Philemon wasn't real in the physical sense, but he was true. He represented the inner guide that lives in all of us, waiting for us to finally be quiet enough to hear. Another figure was the Red One, dark, seductive, destructive, a force of suppressed desire and shadow. Instead of fighting him, Jung listened. He realized that even this figure was not an enemy, but a part of himself that had been repressed. You see, this is how the soul speaks, not in logical sentences, not in scientific explanations, but in symbols, in dreams that unsettle you, in moods that arrive without reason, in fantasies you never admit out loud. The soul speaks in a symbolic code, and depression, Jung believed, is often part of that code. Because what we call depression may not just be a lack of energy or happiness. It may be truth invading your life. Truth about the friendships that were never real. Truth about the career you built that doesn't belong to you. Truth about the false self you've been wearing like armor just to survive. And when the soul begins to revolt, it doesn't look like a rebellion with fire and noise. It looks like numbness, exhaustion, apathy, detachment. That's the unconscious shutting down the surface level, so you are forced to go deeper. This is why Jung's Red Book is so important. He stopped treating the unconscious as a disease and started treating it as a language. The visions were metaphors. The voices were personifications of forgotten emotions. The chaos was not insanity, it was communication. And here's the key. If you can learn to listen to this language, the depression begins to shift. Instead of seeing it as a malfunction, you begin to see it as initiation. A passage, a psychic death that clears the ground for something new to grow. Jung wrote, "Depression is like a woman in black. If she turns up, don't send her away. Invite her in, offer her a seat, and listen to what she has to say." That is the language of the soul, and it is speaking to you right now, through your silence, through your fatigue, through the emptiness you can't explain. The question is, will you listen? When Jung recorded his visions in the Red Book, he wasn't only documenting madness. He was leaving behind a map for anyone who would one day feel what he felt. That slow unraveling, the quiet collapse of everything that once seemed solid. And if you're in that place right now, there are signs. Subtle, terrifying, undeniable signs that what feels like falling apart is actually the beginning of awakening. It begins with your relationships. At first, you don't understand why conversations feel thinner, why laughter with old friends sounds hollow, why the people who used to light up your world suddenly feel like strangers in familiar bodies. Slowly, you stop playing along. You stop being the one who texts first, the one who bends, the one who holds the bridge together. And when the silence stretches too long, they call you cold, distant, changed. They're right, you are. Because for the first time, you've stopped pretending. Then something heavier arrives, grief. Not grief for a person, but grief for yourself. The old you, the people pleaser, the perfectionist, the strong one who never broke down. You wore those masks for so long that they began to feel like skin. And now, as they fall away, you feel both relief and sorrow. Because even though they suffocated you, they protected you. They helped you survive. But you can't carry them anymore. And the emptiness you feel is not the end. It is the sacred space where something real can finally grow. The more the masks fall, the more chaotic you become inside. Peace one moment, rage the next. Laughter followed by sudden tears. A clarity that dissolves into despair. You wonder if you're unstable. But Jung would say this chaos is the natural consequence of letting the unconscious rise. Everything you buried, the childhood wounds, the shame you hid, the anger you swallowed, even the desires you never admitted, all of it begins to surface. And though it feels like madness, it's simply the truth demanding to be seen. As this happens, the strangest thing occurs. You lose interest in being liked. The applause, the approval, the tiny rewards that once kept you alive, they stop matching. You post something and no one reacts. And for the first time, it doesn't sting. You speak your truth, and if people misunderstand, you let them. You realize validation was a drug, and now you're finally sober. What fills you now is not attention, but silence, solitude, self-respect. But with this shift comes a price. You start to notice your presence unsettles people. You don't raise your voice, yet people feel judged. You set boundaries, and they feel abandoned. You speak calmly, and they feel exposed. That's because you've become a mirror. Without even trying, your authenticity reflects the very shadows others are desperate to avoid. And when people look at you, they don't just see you, they see the truth of themselves. Some won't like it. Some will call you difficult, selfish, even dangerous. But that's not your burden to carry. This is what Jung experienced when he descended into the unconscious. Friends drifted away. Colleagues called him mad. Even his reputation suffered. But he couldn't go back. Once he had seen his soul, he couldn't unsee it. Once he had met his real self, he could no longer wear the mask. So if you find your connections fading, if you grieve for your old self, if your emotions whip through you like storms, if validation loses its grip on you, and if people seem unsettled by your presence, don't mistake it for failure. These are not symptoms of collapse. They are milestones of transformation. Yes, it feels like dying. But what's really happening is the death of what was false. And beneath the ashes, something more authentic is struggling to breathe. You are not falling apart. You are falling into place. Awakening doesn't feel like enlightenment. Not at first. It doesn't feel like golden light pouring into your life or joy blooming in your chest. In fact, it feels much closer to dying. You isolate without meaning to. The tears come for no reason. Rage erupts like a storm, then vanishes into silence. You feel shame, guilt, even nausea at the thought of who you were and what you've carried. And when people ask what's wrong, you can't explain. How do you tell someone you no longer recognize the person wearing your skin? Carl Jung once wrote, There is no coming to consciousness without pain. He meant that becoming real is not a gentle unfolding, it is a sacrifice. You give up being liked in exchange for being whole. You trade being understood for being authentic. You surrender comfort for the chance to actually live. And this sacrifice feels brutal, because in those moments, it seems like everything is slipping through your hands. Friends, identity, direction, even meaning itself. But this collapse is not the end. It's fire. And fire always destroys before it reveals. It burns away the masks you thought you couldn't live without. It melts down the illusions you built your life upon. And what's left, though fragile and raw, is real. The world doesn't know what to do with this process. Society prefers you smiling, medicated, manageable. It tells you to distract yourself, to stay busy, to fix your attitude. But Jung knew better. He knew that depression, despair, emptiness, these are not defects. They are thresholds. They are passages into a deeper self. And if you resist them, if you rush back to comfort too soon, you remain half awake for the rest of your life. So you walk through the fire, not gracefully, not with certainty, but step by trembling step. You let the rage rise. You let the tears come. You let the silence press against your chest until it feels unbearable. And in the middle of that storm, something shifts. The old world dies. The performance ends. And through the smoke, a truer voice begins to whisper. This is the hidden truth Jung wanted us to see. You are not being destroyed by your suffering. You are being remade by it. The self you thought you were is burning to ashes. But in those ashes lies the beginning of a self that doesn't perform, doesn't beg, doesn't pretend. So if right now you feel like you're breaking, understand this. You are not broken. You are walking through fire. And on the other side of that fire waits a self you've never truly met. Breaking free from the darkness doesn't happen through escape. It happens through surrender. Jung didn't run from the shadows that haunted him. He listened to them, wrote them down, painted them, gave them form. And in doing so, he discovered that the very things he feared were also the very things that could heal him. The first step in breaking free is to let go of the need to be understood. For most of your life, you've explained yourself to your parents, to friends, to society. You've justified your choices, defended your feelings, apologized for your boundaries. But the truth is, you were not born to be understood. You were born to be whole, and wholeness requires misunderstanding. It requires being willing to have people call you selfish, distant, or strange, while you quietly choose authenticity over approval. Jung himself was branded mad, even abandoned by colleagues who once admired him. Yet he kept going, because the freedom of living by truth was greater than the comfort of being accepted by lies. The second step is mourning the old identity. Who you thought you were was shaped in survival. You believed you were strong because you never cried, kind because you never said no, healed because you stayed busy. But all of this was performance, compensation, armor. Letting it go feels like death, and in a way it is. You are burying a version of yourself who tried to be loved by being what the world wanted. Don't hate that version. Don't shame them. Thank them for getting you this far. Then let them rest. The third step is building a ritual around silence. Jung didn't simply think his way through the unconscious. He treated silence like a temple. He painted what he saw, journaled what he heard, walked in nature, sat with his visions. He gave form to what emerged instead of running from it. And that's what you must do. Don't drown the silence with constant noise. Enter it. Let it echo. Let it show you the truths you've ignored because the world was always too loud. Silence is not empty. It is full of messages that you've never had the courage to hear. The fourth step is creating a new inner code. When your old world collapses, don't try to rebuild the same thing. Build something different. Write down principles that feel like fire in your chest. Something like, I will no longer trade authenticity for acceptance. I will no longer chase what leaves me empty. I will protect my peace as if it is sacred. I will walk away without guilt. I will express what is real, not what is easy. I will stop explaining my worth. It is self-evident. This is the anchor that keeps you steady when the outside world tries to pull you back into the old self. And finally, the fifth step, transcend the label of depression. This may be the hardest, because society has taught you to see your suffering as a defect, a diagnosis, a malfunction in your chemistry. But Jung offered another way. Depression, in his language, was not an end state. It was a descent, a phase of soul withdrawal, preparing you for rebirth. That means the point is not to go back to who you were before the darkness came, because that person was never truly you. The point is to emerge different, stronger, clearer, realer. So breaking free is not about fighting your way out. It's not about smiling harder or forcing positivity or pretending everything is fine. Breaking free means allowing the masks to fall, surrendering to silence, building a code that feels like truth, and daring to believe that the pain you feel is not your enemy. It is your initiation. This is what Jung did. And when he emerged, he didn't just return as the man he was before. He returned as someone who carried fire. Fire that reshaped psychology, and fire that still burns as a guide for anyone willing to descend into themselves. And that same fire is in you. You began this journey believing you were broken, convinced that the heaviness inside of you was proof of failure. But now you see it differently. What you called depression may not be the end at all. It may be the beginning, the first crack in the mask, the first whisper from the soul, the first sign that the life you've been living no longer fits who you truly are. Carl Jung dared to walk into his own abyss. He let the visions come. He let the shadows speak. He let his world collapse so that something truer could rise from the ruins. And he left behind the Red Book, not as a cure, not as a solution, but as a testament. That descent into darkness can also be a passage into awakening. So now the question turns to you. What if the emptiness you feel is not random, but a message? What if the silence pressing in on you is not a punishment, but an invitation? What if the breakdown you fear is actually the doorway to a breakthrough? You may feel lost, numb, detached, but perhaps that numbness is your soul refusing to keep playing dead. Perhaps that detachment is your spirit pulling away from what was never real. And perhaps what feels like the end of you is the beginning of you. Jung once said, "The sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of being." That is what you are being called to do. To let the fire of truth burn away the illusions. To step through the door of despair, not as a victim of it, but as someone willing to see what lies beyond. So remember this, you are not depressed. You are awakening. You are remembering who you are. And this is not the end of your story. It is only the first page. If these words found you in the dark, then you were meant to hear them. And if you know someone else who feels lost in that same silence, share this with them. Remind them they are not broken, they are awakening. If you'd like to keep walking deeper into Jung, philosophy, and the hidden life of the soul, join me here. Subscribe, not for more noise, but for more light in the darkness. Because your awakening has only just begun.